Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And today, our guest is Dr. Benjamin Caplan. How you doing?
I'm great, Len. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being on. I know we sort of not directly but indirectly know each other through the industry. So I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to kind of talk to you one-on-one because I engage with your content. I love your approach to what we're doing in this in the cannabis industry because this passion I have for this plant as medicine. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I had a conversation with a long time ago with the cannabis czar for California, Lori Ajax. And I remember having this conversation with her and said to her, there's some challenges in people getting their medicine, and they can't get their one-to-ones and all these other. And she looked at me and goes, "Come on, you know that this is not really medicine." And I was just like, floored. I'm like, you're
Wow.
making decisions for the state and you don't believe it's medicine. So question I have for you is, you mentioned, I think even today, and I was engaged in some of your content, that medical professionals, doctors, should know about the endocannabinoid system. And do you feel that your colleagues don't know about the endocannabinoid system? You know the moment when you realize that your high hit you way harder than you expected. Your heart's racing, your head's spinning, and you wish that you could hit an emergency stop button. Guess what? There's an emergency stop button that's available now, or at least a pause. It's called Antidose. Antidose is a fast-acting THC-free formula and designed to minimize the unwanted effects of high-potency THC, seeking you back to being yourself and fast. Whether you're stuck on a couch or spinning in your head, Antidose helps you to reset, restore, and rebalance. Find out more at antidose.com.
Yes, I think it's probably safe to say that the vast majority of doctors, healthcare providers out there are clueless. They understand that people are using cannabis. They don't really understand why. They get that people are having fun with it. Like in medical school, you learn about addiction. You learn that people are drawn to certain illegal substances, bad substances, and it's a problem. You as a clinician have to walk them sort of toward a path of righteousness.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of presumption. There's a lot of ego there. There's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding. And there's no education about the endocannabinoid system. Most of the textbooks that doctors are learning from were printed after 1992, when the endocannabinoid system was really kind of first discovered. So there's no way that the teachers of the teachers I had would know. And it's just, ignorance passed on. So most of my colleagues don't know because they weren't taught in medical school.
Right.
And sadly, a lot of doctors don't continue learning more. Like, doctors have to do continuing medical education. They do basic requirements for keeping up with their specialty. But if things aren't in the mold, if the endocannabinoid system isn't part of a specialty, they're not learning about it. It's a really sad reality, but that's partly what you're doing. That's partly what I'm doing is to bust through these old chains and help people understand that medicine got it wrong. We got it wrong as a profession.
Maybe we can tell the audience, or you can tell the audience, why is it important for a healthcare professional to know, first of all, that there is such a thing as the endocannabinoid system? Second, the endocannabinoid system, why is the endocannabinoid system important as a whole.
It's such a fundamental thing. It's almost laughable to be having this kind of discussion. Um, if I told you serotonin was a thing, like everybody knows that that's a big deal. They might not understand exactly what it does. It has something to do with depression, or maybe it's something to do with appetite, or whatever. But they know it's like you're human, you have serotonin.
Yeah.
But people don't know that you're human. You have an endamide. You have 2-AG. These are basic floating molecules that we're all born with that govern fundamental physiology. Things like appetite, things like your sleep-wake cycles, things like your mood stability, things like the way cells grow and cancer grows. These are basic functions in the human body, and most of us, Len, grow up thinking that we have a full picture. We know humans have certain body parts, and we know we have certain fluids, and we think that's a complete picture. And we were totally wrong. There's this essential system that is actually the most prevalent communication system in the body. Like, it's not even a small fry. This is the big deal. And we had no idea.
Yeah,
That's
I do agree with you with this whole notion of ego and continuing education, because I've given lectures at universities for medical students, and I was the first person. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even close to being a doctor, and I'm invited to speak to medical students about a system that they should have been taught. And I just got back from A4M, which is a longevity conference in Las Vegas. So I'm figuring these are the people that actually are going to talk about. They are functional medical professionals, integrative medicine. They're talking about stem cells and exosomes and peptides. I'm like, my people, one single person in the whole conference even mentioned the endocannabinoid system. And I was just like floored by that. So what can we do? And I'm putting myself as a colleague, even though I kind of am not with the initials next to my name, but we're fighting the same fight. What can we do to help get the medical community to understand that there is such a fundamental system?
It's a tough battle. We have infrastructure in our culture. We have established medical hospital clinic infrastructure. We have insurance infrastructure. We have governmental infrastructure, and the profession too, but that sort of falls in between the cracks. All of these different systems are ignorant about the endocannabinoid system, are ignorant about how cannabis works in the body. So how do we as individuals, as real people finding this useful, how do we fix the system? It's a tough battle. I think to some degree, the community has to do what they have been doing, which is trust their own experience, understand that if they're sleeping well because of this plant, it's not random. Try to convince the people that are around them that, hey, this worked for me, maybe it can work for you. Like, I don't think everybody has to be a scientific soldier. But I think then it falls on people like you and I, the professionals who've established ourselves in the community as voices of trust, to hit those larger institutions. And I think, the fact that you're giving those lectures at medical school is important. Hopefully some of those kids will be awake and paying attention. I'm One of my companies, the Commonwealth Project, is bringing the fight to Washington. I'm going to be testifying at the U.S. DEA conferences, and I'm going to let them know that cannabis is working for the over 65 crowd, that for seniors and most of the ailments of aging, and you don't have to necessarily be a senior to have an ailment of aging, but be that as it may, cannabis works, and people enjoy it. It's saving people money that they're not spending in other ways. So Medicare, which covers the healthcare of all the seniors, could be saving money. So if we play their game, if we play the government's game, which is they're thinking about dollars and cents, they're less interested in sort of individuals and how people are getting better or whether they're happy. But if the government can save tens of billions of dollars, they'll start to pay attention. And so will the insurance companies, so will the hospitals, same story.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit of an uphill battle based on a lot of things that you said and big pharma, but let me rewind back, and I want to get to sort of your origin story first, and we'll get, because I'm sure you didn't, this wasn't in the initial plan of young Ben Caplan to be the big
Was
medical
not,
cannabis activist. So where did you
not at
grow
all.
up?
I'm an East Coast guy. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, went to preppy square kind of under schools and some pretty tough university, graduate school education. Williams College, Tufts Medical School, and Boston University School of Medicine for residency. And I knew people that consumed cannabis. I had friends. I still have those friends who consumed cannabis. I didn't really participate actually ever until college. And even then, it was just fooling around. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't get it. It was just other people were doing it, so I thought I'd give it a shot. It wasn't actually until my second or third year practicing medicine at one of the hospitals in Boston, where my patients were telling me that cannabis was helping them, and they didn't need the pills that I was recommending. They didn't need the referrals that I was offering because they were fine without it. And I took a moment, because these are patients I trusted and was learning from at the time, and I did what I was taught. I looked up cannabis. I looked up why these people might be in their delusion enjoying this and feeling like, it was helpful. I looked through these biased glasses. Um, but what I found in the literature is thousands of articles that were showing cannabis was evil. And I also found thousands of articles that was showing cannabis was not evil, that it had benefit, that it was helping with cellular infrastructure, that it was helping with mood stuff. There was psychological benefit, there was physical benefit. And I was sitting here like, oh, okay, that wasn't surprising. All of medicine has something in the plus column and something in the minus column. I said, oh, this is kind of a real thing. There's a real scientific discussion going on here, but nobody taught me. And I didn't know that this discussion was out there. And I quickly realized that not only could I help people with this and learn from the patients that were teaching me and then pass that on, but I also had sort of a duty here for the industry to kind of let a loud medical voice be heard that wasn't stoned out of his mind. We have a lot of leadership in the cannabis space that doesn't look trustworthy. They don't sound trustworthy because they sound stoned and they sound like they're high in their own medicine. And that's great, but that's not going to reach everybody. So I've sort of found my boring voice, I guess, the square, straight edge kind of voice, the academic, and I've just taken it wherever it wants to go.
So going back to your childhood, your do you have siblings or your parents together? Like, I want to go and kind of dive into
Putting me on the couch. All
well,
right.
what were you like? First of all, let's answer that, and then I have a follow-up question to that.
I have a very privileged household. I come from a nuclear family with a working father who's a very famous neurologist, world-renowned neurologist. My mother is also a nurse, and we have 6 children in my family who are all healthy and educated and really privileged. So I grew up in an academic atmosphere, aspiring to help other people.
But when
I
you were a
didn't have-
kid, like when you were a kid, were you like, because you grew up in this family that's well educated, that's in healthcare, were you like, okay, I'm going to be a doctor, or I liked art, I like math, I like playing hockey, I like the Boston Bruins, man. That's what I aspire to be. What were your interests?
Um, my interests are so varied. I picked a liberal arts college because I couldn't decide. I loved music. I'm a lifetime musician, 40 years now. I love athletics. I love science. I love basically anything that tickles my fancy. Um, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I loved psychology. I found psychology in my undergrad education. I'd never had psych and just fell in love. But I had a stern conversation with my brother, who's my best friend, saying I wasn't going to make any money with psychology. It's just a very difficult field these days. Back in the early 2000s. Um, so I decided medicine made more sense financially as a goal, and I had the discipline to do whatever I wanted. So I just did it and fell with medicine.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because and I want to get into the music part of it because I'm curious about your musicianship. I'm a huge music person too, but I'm just so I was really into music, and to me, not playing an instrument, I was never like gifted to play an instrument. I think my ADD would kick in. I never had the discipline to really practice that much. But I found like Rick Rubin, great music producer. I'm like, wait a second, he doesn't play an instrument. He's around musicians. He's got a good ear and he's giving him feedback. I'm like, I want to do that. So I told my parents when I was, I don't know, maybe 16 or so, when I go to college, I want to do that. And they're like, well, what is that? I'm like, well, it's music related. I'm not sure. I don't know. I didn't know what a producer was. So I'm like, I'm not sure, but that, and then like someone like Quincy Jones, but he's more of a musician. So that was my goal. That was my plan. My parents had an intervention for me. They actually brought in their friend who's a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I'm an immigrant. I was born in Lithuania. I came over. My family is my grandparents who were in the Holocaust and all that stuff. So very, very, you have to get an education, you have to do this, and you have to. So they had an intervention for me, and they said, it just reminded me of this whole thing. Money. You're not going to make any money in the music business, anything to do with music. You need to go in medicine, but you're not, or a lawyer, but you're not really cut out. So we figured out physical therapy because it's sort of in between. So I went to physical therapy school based on the intervention. I never worked as a physical therapist in my life. It wasn't for me, but I had the background education. So I sort of went into this tangent of not pursuing. I'm grateful for it now because I have a background in what I'm doing now, which gave me some of that. But it was so many different things. And then I had people that the first time they pick up a guitar, they're like, I'm doing this for the rest of my life. Never thought about doing anything else. So how does that sort of come back to you? Because you have this passion for music, but you're also, you have some influence to get you into medicine. So how did you deal with that?
I mean, musicians don't only play, they also listen. And we all know the crappy doctors out there don't listen. So I think my skill with music, my training with listening has made me a better doctor. And I think, I've always been a counterculture sort of mind. I see what the shape of the status quo is, and I try to mess with it. I try to find the holes in kind of what's around me. And I've always done that. I think cannabis and actually now menopause care are two areas of medicine that have just been left to dry, kind of hung by the wayside because of ignorance. Not many people watching probably are aware that, 1 billion women now are menopausal, and there's not much knowledge about menopause care. I mean, the idea that menopause is about sex hormones, we all think, oh, women are not fertile anymore. That's through a lens of this misogynistic, male-dominated society. And I hate that people before me didn't question those things. That we sort of have this culture that's very sheep-like. Like there aren't too many lions out there who fight against the lines. And I've always been an out-of-box thinker.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You're sort of like my long lost cousin because cannabis, my company started doing genetic testing for the endocannabinoid system and all that stuff. The second thing that we started focusing, I got a call from Dr. Jennifer Berman, who's one of the top female sexual health doctors in the country. And she said, Len, I've been seeing a lot of younger women lately that are showing signs of perimenopause. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the hormones that's in their food or anything like that. So that may be a big part of that. And she said, is there a way that we can do a test that can help predict if somebody's prone to severe adverse effects uh, related to menopause, like weight gain, hot flash severity, all these different things. So we created a test with her for it's called menopause biotype, but it's specifically for that and trying to get people to start focusing and at a meeting in the UK with their health system in the UK, and they're now creating a big focus on menopause. But I thought it was really funny because they're getting their employers to support women who are in the work field to help them alleviate menopause. And the thing that they instituted now is to have a fan available for every woman that's in their office. I said, yes, that's a solution. You guys got it. That's exactly it. Nobody's thinking about preventative. Is there a way that we can see something that maybe somebody may be predisposed to, and what action can we take before it sort of shows up? And you're absolutely right. It seems to me like there's a certain mindset that's fixed. It's a fixed mindset. We keep going from generation to generation in medicine and healthcare with a fixed mindset instead of being open to saying maybe there's different ways that we can approach that. I wanted to ask you, in your traditional training, as you were going through this and you were talking about, having some experience with cannabis, was there a certain incident or what inspired you to sort of bridge the gap between traditional medicine that you learned and start looking at cannabis as medicine as well?
So I'm a family physician. I'm a board certified, non-quacky, normal general practitioner. And part of the normal training for family doctors is what else are patients doing in the primary care office? Most patients these days, 3/4 of patients do something outside of the traditional medical office, whether it's just a gym membership and they're doing athletics, it could be nutrition, it could be massage, yoga, Tai Chi, acupuncture. The list is long, of course, of non-traditional or alternative medicine solutions. So that was part of my training to kind of think beyond just pharmaceutical medicine and what can be done in the clinic. And I focus as a primary care doctor on my patient first. I'm learning from them about their lives, about what's worked for them and didn't work for them. And I'm helping them understand what options are out there. And, if I only limit what I know, like most doctors do, to what I can prescribe at the pharmacy, then I think I'm letting my patients down. I mean, my post on Substack today was sort of calling that unethical. I think doctors have a responsibility to understand their patients, what's working for their patients, and to be leaders of what is better medicine, even if it's new, even if it's not well studied. As long as it's safe and effective, it becomes really unethical not to bring that to the patients and not help them understand it, simply because the doctor doesn't want to learn or hasn't learned yet. So it's an interesting time in the world. I mean, this is such a huge subject, the endocannabinoid system. It's such a huge system. And at the same time, there are so many doctors, institutions of doctors that are clueless. This has never happened before in human history. I mean, the history of medicine isn't that old. We're talking about 200-ish years. But this is a fundamental mistake that our predecessors handed, and really nobody's taken up the mantle to change this. All of us kind of here listening and watching, participating, are living through a revolution in modern healthcare. It doesn't seem that way, but we're reading the news that, people are starting to prefer cannabis to alcohol. Like that seems like people get that that's a big thing. Um, but the doctors, the patients, the institutions still don't understand this is really like a transformation of all medical care. I mean, it would not surprise me in 10 or 15 years if cannabis is a first line choice for patients for pain relief, for sleep, for anxiety. It's that effective for the patients I see, and it's that safe. It's safer in many respects than the over-the-counter medicines that people can take whenever and however they want.
Do you get pushback from colleagues in your industry that, it's quackery? It's Ben is like, he's one of those foo-foo. Did he move to LA or something like that? Is he starting to microdose every single day? Is he getting these? Are you getting some pushback that you're on the fringe instead of actually being a person that, as you said, using real science and evidence? Are you getting any of that?
None, not at all. I mean, there are some people on social media, on LinkedIn, sometimes who try to challenge me, and that usually never repeats that mistake, because I come full force. I'm not afraid, and I'm not an ass, and I'll come back at people with studies that that explain to them how they're mistaken, and I don't do it in a way that's nasty. So I don't come with baggage of being a jerk. But like in high school, they would tell athletes, point to the scoreboard if you're winning. You don't have to be a jerk. You don't have to talk smack. And what I do is point to the scoreboard, which for me is the cannabis literature library. And we're seeing now 6,000 new papers every year coming out. Actually, it's probably much more than that this year. But I can just show people the literature that's there. And I'm not afraid to help people learn. I think most of the flack that would be coming my way comes from ignorance, and most of the people kind of get that. But my mission isn't to be right. My mission is to bring everybody to a better place. So it's really it's an interesting approach. That's not like, I'm not quacky or you're not quacky. It's about we were all mistaken, and this has to be better for all of us.
You brought up an interesting point about this whole stoner culture. And I'm just wondering if there's, and I can't really pinpoint anything else like this that ever happened in medicine where you actually you have an ancient plant from thousands of years ago that kind of infiltrated. Yes, it was in the pharmacopoeia and all that stuff, but then it infiltrated the counterculture. And there's a stigma associated with this plant because you're using it for, I hate the terminology recreational, but you're using it for whatever reason you want to use it for. You not
Fun?
necessarily, yeah, fun. You're not thinking that it's medicine. My story is like I was diagnosed with ADD and I was put on prescription medication, and I found some kids and they asked me if I wanted to smoke, and that became like, I'm like, holy shit, that I don't need my medicine anymore. But I never told anybody at that time that that's what it was doing for me. I just felt that. So I was wondering, because we have this, also stoner culture, we have this new suit culture that's coming in because there's a huge amount of money in the industry. And then we have the medical practitioners. Is there a way to be able to either separate those two things or bring the collective together to say, yes, you can use it for whatever purpose, like you said, fun, but at the end of the day, we're starting with this is medicine. This is a therapeutic wellness plant, and now we have to treat it as that, whatever reason you're using it for.
I think if I look back historically, of course, there's always been a culture and a counterculture. In the 20s to the 30s, there was a seriousness about, the man putting on a suit and tie, going to work, women doing womanly things at home. And I think over time, people bucked that trend. People saw the inequity, they saw the silliness of those cultures. And then, think to the 60s, there was a resurgence of 50s and 60s, a resurgence of business and suits, and also a stronger counterculture with the hippie movement. Fast forward to the 70s, the 80s, and now this millennial culture where, people don't even go to work as much anymore. Influencers, are anything but serious. I think the counterculture is really winning. Look at websites, like the OnlyFans movement is like $1 billion industry. People making their money at home. It's totally counterculture. I think the suits, you look at people like the tech leaders, like they're not serious. They don't look serious. Even the major, CEOs of all the big companies, they're not wearing suits anymore. They're casual. So I think interestingly, the serious culture is going to die, um, to whatever extent. But I think it's not to be missed. I think, people are stressed out these days. We are often too serious. We take ourselves too seriously. I think that's part of what draws people to cannabis is that it helps people feel fun, pleasure, happy. They don't have to deal with the stress of the daytime reality. They can kind of escape to this other reality. Um, and I think that's partly why it's stayed so prevalent in human culture for so many years. And I think it's not gonna die. I think it's gonna be thriving.
It's interesting because you're sort of saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're sort of saying that, there is medicine for specific conditions, and we can measure the efficacy of that medicine. But it's okay to also use cannabis in a way to relax instead of having somebody comes home, instead of pouring themselves a drink like we used to see on different shows all the time. They can choose their cannabis or gummy or whatever it is that they do, which is probably more prevalent nowadays than the TV shows show us. Anyway, it's not realistic anymore that people are coming home pouring themselves, a glass of whiskey. Maybe some people are, but you're saying that it's okay, and it's still okay because it can still be accepted by the medical society as, having those both dual existence in a way.
Yes, there's deep knowledge in our culture, and oftentimes you have to look between the lines. In the 60s and 70s, people used to say that cannabis was mind expanding. They would feel like it was expanding their horizons. And we learned later with functional imaging that actually cannabis does lead to neurogenesis. It does lead to increased, neural activity and cross connections in the brain. It's physically and literally mind expanding. We also have in our culture the idiom "laughter is the best medicine." And we know when someone's sick to ask, "How are you feeling?" Not "How sick are you?" or where are you sick?" We ask, "How are you feeling?" Um, we are very emotional animals, and we judge our well-being by how happy we are, how content we are. Um, and that actually is the endocannabinoid system functioning. So it's so ironic that we've been missing that knowledge. Like it's funny, I give this example to people a lot. Um, we all know somebody who's happy-go-lucky. No matter what happens, a rainy day will never get them down. But medicine couldn't explain why that was. Like, clearly they're not depressed. It's not a serotonin thing. It's not a dopamine thing. It's not a personality thing. Like, we just didn't know how to explain that.
Yeah, they're just
And
consuming a lot of sativa dominant hybrids, I think, all day. That's why.
right. Yeah, as if that meant anything. Um,
Right.
On the other hand, we know people who are grumpy and they're not necessarily depressed. They're just curmudgeony. They just can't smile. They don't have a good day. They're always in pain, whatever it is. And of course, these are two sides of the endocannabinoid spectrum that some people are endocannabinoid flush. Some people are, endocannabinoid deficient. We just didn't understand how to communicate about that. Um, so I think this is going to revolutionize not just medicine, but the culture and our communication, assuming we can get a better lexicon, because talking about things like high and and downers, uppers, sativa, indica, these are all just silly words.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. But that's the thing. Like, I feel that terminology And the lack of consistency is one of the biggest barriers to integrating cannabis into mainstream healthcare. Uh, how can we overcome some of those barriers? And what are some of the other barriers that are?
Yeah, I actually I see what you're saying, and I think about it differently. I think the lack of homogeneity, the lack of consistency, is one of the benefits of cannabis. I think that's one of the liabilities of the myopic perspective doctors have had about how medicine should be. We think of medicine as, oh, you should take 25 milligrams and you should take that every day. And I think for the rest of your life, like that's stupid. Nobody is the same person they were 6 months ago. I'm not eating the same stuff. I'm not happy the same way I was. I'm not, everything is different. So why would I be taking the same medicine as if I'm a machine? That's dumb. That's a bad system. Cannabis is internally inconsistent. I mean, the same plants, as you know, but the listeners might not, is not the same bottom, middle, and top. And when you give it different nutrients or you sing to it, it's going to have enzyme action that's different and going to produce different product. Like the same exact plant grown differently will produce different stuff.
And cured differently too, grown and cured.
Of course. So that lack of consistency, that randomness, that chaos actually is good for us. And one of the things we see in clinic is people become tolerant of that same product they've been taking over and over and over, and they need more of it or they need something different. People naturally move away from that consistency, even when it is there. So I think medicine actually has to adapt an individualization. I think, your company gets along the same idea that we're trying to figure out what is unique about one person genetically. I'm actually not talking about the sort of genetic path, but actually the epigenetic path. Like, what is it about my microbiome, my diet, my exercise, my thought process that's changing my chemistry? And how might cannabis supplement that or change that in a way that I want to be useful? I don't think we know quite yet how all of these puzzle pieces fit together. But it seems to me that the fear of unknowns in chaos is going to be a short-lived problem now that we have AI. I mean, we have computer systems that can understand complex structure and very complex math. And I think that's really ultimately what this is we have to be able to measure what's going on internally, externally. We have to understand what this cannabis plant is doing to us internally and calculate sort of an understanding.
Yeah, and we start with genetics, but we also look at epigenetics in my company, like methylation, methyl groups with biological age. So the goal is you do your genome, you have your personalized protocol, there's feedback, and we also look at if your biological age has reduced and all these other markers. But it's not about my company. I'm just the challenge that I also see in speaking to people that are in the pharmaceutical space. It's mind-blowing to them that you have all these different molecules together. They can't get their mind wrapped around it. The industry is very used to, we have a molecule, we have two molecules. We're going to go through all these trials to see how those molecules work for a specific condition. What do you mean entourage? What do you mean 300 different components? What do you mean it changes? They can't get their mind wrapped around that. So you brought up AI. Perfect. AI can actually support them in trying to figure out patterns. You and I both know David Miri, Dedi, and the work that he was doing in Israel with different cancer cells and how, different components of the plant can create apoptosis. Some of them don't work for individuals. So it definitely is that experience. But how do we get the pharmaceutical industry, or do we need to get them? Because, the conversation is rescheduling, right? So if you're rescheduling, now you have big pharma involved, and they can't get their mind wrapped around this.
Yeah, I mean, the bicycle industry is not a threat to the car industry. They're totally different. And I think the pharmaceutical industry and the infrastructure we have now, which is hospitals have to have dependency. We have to make sure that doctors feel safe prescribing medicines. They know that someone's not going to have a, life-ending interaction. That system has evolved over the last couple hundred years with intention, and we have, FDA approved medicines that have an important place in the sort of payment system, the capitalist culture we have. The insurance companies aren't going to cover random stuff yet, but that's shifting, and I'm trying to be a little bit of the lever to make that shift, to have another system that can be helpful, that can be healthy, and actually in some cases better than the pharmaceutical industry, but it doesn't have to replace it. And I think the pharmaceutical industry knows that. I mean, we have, some of my companies have conversations actively with insurance, both public and private, and they're interested, they're engaged, they're researching, they're trying to figure out how they can be involved. The rules might change. Right now the FDA kind of has a structure around very few molecules in an approved product. But the DEA now has a botanicals division, and they're looking at, multifactorial medicines. So maybe the rules will change. Maybe medicine has to change. That we need something like a shaman, where it's a partner. It's a partner in healthcare, and the partner operates a little bit outside the traditional model. For a lot of people, that's their exercise. Whatever, their buddy or their masseuse or their acupuncturist or their chiropractor. Those professions operate outside the traditional medical model, and for some people, they're life-saving. So I think cannabis might end up being that. And I suppose that's what I'm living. I am sort of living the cannabis medicine specialty, and people that want guided, individualized care, that's what I do. But I don't know that the traditional medical industry will see what I'm doing as something they should be doing, or I should fit into their mold. I think it's just two separate paths.
But when you're going to speak to like the DEA and Congress and all these other things, there's all these proposals that are going into place, and we're going to modify the law, so we need to reschedule. And if they reschedule that to 3 or 4, what does that mean for the industry? How does it catch up? We have this dispensary model right now. How can you as a doctor write a prescription and say, hey, okay, I prescribe cannabis, go down to your dispensary and get some dab hits and get your rig? Like, how does that work?
Well, first of all, there are very few doctors who are willing to take that leap. So we're going to have a period where doctors have to learn, and chances are they're not going to. They're going to push it to the pot docs, if there are any left. I don't think rescheduling makes a lot of sense, for the reasons you're suggesting. Doctors aren't going to take legal liability for recommending a specific product, which they can't depend on. I write a prescription because I know, at worst, if it's a generic, it can be within a 10% margin of what I think it will be. And I know the adverse effects that are possible. That knowledge isn't there yet with cannabis to be able to prescribe it. So the whole system has to shift somehow.
Would there be I'm trying to get you crystal ball, your vision for the future. Would there be a dual path? Like there's a medical path that's going to have consistent 25 milligram, delta 9 THC, this much CBD, this many terpenes. Like you have your formulation. It's a formulary. Maybe it's a compounding pharmacist who actually creates these specific formulations. And then you still have sort of the botanical role where you have flower that has all these different inconsistencies. Do you see maybe a parallel path looking some similar to that?
No. I think the way you're describing it is sort of resisting the chains of the medical model we've all grown up with. Cannabis, I think it's better to think about it like nutrition or like exercise or sleep. These are all very personal, very widely varying, um, multi-system physiology. Um, we would never mandate everybody takes vitamin D or vitamin C or vitamin K. Like, that's crazy, right? We think about you should eat vegetables from this category and that category. You should have a well-rounded plate. Even the nutrition model has changed over time.
Yeah.
But the idea is within large shifts, some things are good for you, if you are deficient in other things. It was sort of I get some weight here and some loss here, and mix and match in a way that will give you good results. But it's not an exact science. And it's very personal and it's very varied depending on what you get. So I think cannabis will be more like that. I think the distinction between recreational and medical is just kind of leftover judgment from a time where people, whatever, got off on judging other people.
Nancy Reagan, that's your brain on drugs kind of thing too.
Right, right. No, I think feeling happy is medicine. And, if people are shy or insecure or scared and they take something to help themselves feel better, they might not think about it in terms like this is medicine, but they're getting a medical effect out of it.
Yeah.
And then vice versa. I know thousands of patients who take cannabis for serious medical illnesses, and it's really just the pleasure that gets them to the next day. And it's actually the most therapeutic aspect of their cannabis consumption is just the joy that they get. So I think the terms have to change. But part of that depends on a culture that's a little bit more mature, a little bit less judgy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we have that. I don't know if that's in the cards, at least in the next couple of years.
Well, speaking of that culture, the new medical students that are coming up, what can we do, to follow your lead, or people that are out there that have that influence? What can we do to get that stigma that's out of the medical school? Maybe newer curriculum, maybe something that the new students can say when they come out of medical school and they go into practice. They don't have that stigma left over because it wasn't stigmatized in medical school. Is there anything we can do about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the community has the most power. I mean, the only reason the industry exists is because people were smoking up in their back rooms, ignoring what the laws were, ignoring what the professionals said. They did what they thought was right. What I encourage people to do is share their stories, share their questions. My Substack, I have a section of my newsletter where I'm just interviewing people and just sharing their stories because they're remarkable. But some of my patients, don't feel comfortable sharing even anonymously. For them, I tell them just ask questions. If your doctor isn't asking you about cannabis, ask, are you not asking me about cannabis? Why are you not asking me about cannabis? Does that not matter to you? Are you not concerned about that? Just to ask questions. It's very hard for people to judge badly someone who's asking a question. So I
But
think,
there's a
sometimes
lack
that's
of
easier.
knowledge. And so I've had this conversation with so many patients that go out and I say, hey, why don't you just talk to your doctor? And they come back and say, my doctor doesn't know anything about it. What do I do? I'm like, educate your doctor.
Yeah.
If they're
Yeah,
open,
no,
if they're
that's
open
right. I mean,
to
yes. So we have a very ignorant culture. We have a very misinformed culture.
Yeah.
And it's weird and it's for me scary. I think that's reality. So we have to make do and we have to shift in small ways. I'm swinging big. My company is having conversations with the executive branch, with the legislative branch of government. We're trying to make big changes. What'll happen in this administration, who knows? But I think it's probably the best shot that I've seen of something making really big changes. And I'm fortunate to be part of it. So it's coming, but that's because I'm in this predicament with very powerful people. It's not me. I mean, I'm fortunate to be able to help them understand. Um, but this country to some degree runs on who you know and who gets to be at the table at the moment that votes happen. Um, and I'm fortunate to be partnered with people who are very powerful.
What are your thoughts on other plant medicines outside of cannabis, like the push for, psilocybin and
Mhm,
ketamine is not a plant medicine, but we'll call it a medicine that was developed for something else that's being utilized with
mhm,
some positive aspects. MDMA, like, MAPS going all the way through phase three,
mhm.
slightly failing. What are your thoughts about all these different medicines?
I get asked a lot, is psilocybin, is MDMA going to replace cannabis? This is just the old fad. There's no MDMA system. There's no psilocybin system. Those are interacting with the endocannabinoid system and the other physiological systems we know about. Cannabis is a much more fundamental biological system um, in our bodies. Um, but this freak plant is also a factory of pharmaceuticals that exists everywhere in nature. So it's not just a better connection with our bodies and what we're born with. The enzymatic reality of this plant produces such an abundance of pharmaceuticals that psilocybin is not. I mean, that's psilocybin and ketamine and MDMA. These are sniper rifles. They are FDA approvable compounds. And I understand why people sort of are drawn to that as a model because it's so familiar and it feels like, oh, that's medicine. That's different than this cannabis, wacky thing, this whole cloud of stuff. Um, but I don't think cannabis will. Um, I don't think these other medicines will hold a candle to cannabis. I think they serve a role, and for a lot of people, cannabis doesn't help them, and psilocybin is the ticket, or MDMA is the ticket. I think there's so much of medicine that has to be personalized. But if we were gambling, if we were betting on what is the plant which is going to help the most people most of the time, I mean, why wouldn't you bet on the 600 to 1,000 compounds over here as opposed to the one over here? Mathematically, it's likely um, that cannabis will win heads over tails.
It's that same model that you were talking about. You said that you had 25 milligrams. Everybody should take 25 milligrams. Or I think for a time, everybody's like 5,000 IUs of vitamin D across the board. Every doctor is prescribing it everywhere. Why? Do I have a deficiency in vitamin D? Yeah. You probably do. You're Ashkenazi light skin. You have it, but you never checked me for it. And why 25? You never did. You never looked at my metabolic function. You never told me that I'm an ultra rapid metabolite, or I have to do my own test to figure out, what my own, like, doctors are just not equipped for that. And maybe it's the insurance culture. Maybe it's like it's not covered. There's no ICD-10 code for it. There's no CPT. I can't. That's not in my, like, I have blinders on. So is there a way, like, I talk about personalization? Obviously, this my business and all that, but are we equipped because we were handcuffed by insurance? Are we equipped, or is it to actually do real personalization, or is it more or less, a healthcare professional, a functional medical professional to say, you know what, we're going to step outside the current system of insurance and we're going to really treat you to prevent some of these things from happening in a more personalized way?
We are so used to thinking about the body as a machine, as a simple machine. Um, for a lot of people, the body can heal itself. And Hippocrates of the Hippocratic Oath um, said, I guess in jest, that sometimes doctors are there to entertain the patients while they get better on their own. Um, I think the shamans and the healers of past understood that the clinical relationship can be a healing relationship, that it can be about support and love, the same way a mother's kiss will heal a child's wound or their woe. I think doctors have come so far the wrong direction lately, where they're just about what pill can I prescribe, what checkbox does this patient meet, what lab testing do they need, what imaging. We've sort of depersonalized medicine. We've put people into boxes of an illness that has a sort of organized path to a therapy. I think people are hungry for connection. And when a doctor can be personal and connect with patients, have a healing relationship, sometimes that's better than whatever medicine would be. So I think, to some degree, the chaos of cannabis, because it's healing, because it's helping by the wayside, frees up patients and doctors to connect in that really healing way. Because I don't feel a burden to know what's going on. It is working. The black box, I don't need to understand. I want to understand what's in there. I want to understand how it works at a molecular level, but I don't need to, because the results are there. And that's a mindset shift for modern medicine. It's just not the way modern medicine is built.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I always talk about it, having a collaborative experience with your healthcare professional. Your partners in the journey, and they can feed some things to you, vice versa. But a lot of doctors are a little bit closed off to that still.
Yeah, no, but that I think is a sad reality, and that only changes when patients demand better. The old lady who's yelling at their doctor, stay here with me, talk to me, don't rush me out, don't look at the computer. We have to set the expectations as patients so that the doctor can fill them. I think, and that's a separate kind of line item, but the internet makes it really hard for people to let go and let doctors be the professionals. Like, there's this pressure because of the internet to think that we know everything, that we can look up everything, but we don't understand what we're reading. Most people don't understand what they're reading. And they come to these conclusions that are sometimes really unhealthy. When I was doing more primary care work, I would often have to fight patients not to take antibiotics. Like, the patients would come in saying, "Oh, I have sinusitis or I have a cold, I need antibiotics." And that's not good for them. It's not healthy. It's actually harmful to them. But they think that's the solution for them because they had antibiotics before, or because they looked it up and learned that was a solution. And so there's this fight with someone, in my position, that spent 20 years studying this, and I'm trying to help them be healthy. And then someone who just looked it up, or who kind of thinks that they know more than the doctor. There's a really weird dynamic now because of the internet. That's pretty new. I mean, my father never had to fight with patients who wanted opiates, or who wanted antibiotics. That was a mainstream part of my career, was trying to figure out ways of communicating with people that were making it clear that I'm trying to help them. I understand what they want, but I have actually a different perspective that's healthier for you in the long run. And unfortunately, we now have so many of those patients that have come through the system and have now gut flora issues because of the antibiotics they took lives, or they have personality issues that that psychologists and psychiatrists can't help with. It's a mess. Our medical system is a mess. So maybe cannabis is a pathway that will do healing, will help people in a separate way, and might help carve a niche that's more welcome, more therapeutic.
Yeah, it's Dr. Google, but now you can have to deal with Dr. ChatGPT and all those other ones too, because there are people going to have it instantaneously. Oh,
Right.
I just looked at my phone, I scanned myself, I have this. They just diagnosed themselves. So yeah, it'll be fun. So I want to talk about music for a little bit. What is you said music was a big part of your life, or is a big part of your life.
Mhm.
What do you play, or what's your music involvement like?
I'm a cellist of about 40 years. I have four children who also play cello. Actually, my teacher who taught me, whatever, 35 years ago, came back to teach my children. So cello is a serious part of my life. I was very um, dedicated to it as a young kid. I was quite gifted, traveled around the world with it, and played through college, and I played for weddings, and I play because I love it.
So
But
cello,
these
like
days,
Yo-Yo Ma type of cello, or
yeah, I had some lessons with Yo-Yo, and I played with him for a little while in high school. We know each other personally.
amazing.
Um, yeah, no, I had a passion, and I went with it. Um, but as we were saying before, what I learned and what I took from cello was the listening and harmonizing with people in a different way.
Cool. All right, so continue the musical questions. Do you remember, and if so, the very first concert that you attended?
So my whole family, also plays music. So it was probably one of my brother's violin concerts.
Uh,
Um, but I've been to more than I could count. Yeah.
all right, so what was the last concert you attended?
Um, I often go to Tanglewood here in Massachusetts. It's I don't know if you're familiar, but it's sort of like a huge football field of grass that surrounds an amphitheater, and you can listen to the Boston Pops and other orchestras that come to visit. Um, and you get to lie down and have a picnic and listen under the stars, if it's good weather. And it's really one of the most special places on earth. There are very few places like that where it's quiet. There's a camaraderie of the community around you, people kind of mini barbecuing or just eating and picnics, drinking wine, playing cards, and then listening to music. It's a really magical time.
Love it.
And I look for those kinds of moments of serenity in this, really difficult culture we have now.
All right, another music question. So for the next year, you can only listen to five albums. No, so you don't have to remember the name of the album. It doesn't, it can
Yeah.
be, Yo-Yo Ma's, whatever. Uh, but what will be those five albums?
Um, I also listen when I'm working out. So probably some album that is more high paced where I can enjoy the music while I'm doing something active. On the other side of the spectrum, I love um, wordless music that still has a soft melody, something like Enya,
Mhm.
um, some classical music, chamber music has a fun space in my heart where it's just few solo musicians playing together. Um, and I guess I don't need too much more than that. I do listen to pop and R&B and rap and sort of other genres of music too. But mostly
Well,
so I don't
so
fall
so
behind my
like
kids.
if I rem is Yo-Yo Ma's is that Goat Rodeo? Was that his is that his project? Goat Rodeo, I think it
Goat
was in,
rodeo.
you know
I'm not
that?
sure.
So he had
Sounds
a I
familiar.
think it's a four piece or five piece, but he that's a specific band that played with so but when you were saying that at the gym, are you
Mhm.
talking about like Metallica, Led Zeppelin kind of music, or is
Sometimes,
that
yeah,
yeah?
yeah, sometimes. It's more housey or
Okay.
rave kind of music
All right, so
sometimes.
that EDM, like dance music,
EDM,
electronic
sure.
dance music kind of thing.
Yep.
Got it. Okay, cool.
I've a pretty eclectic taste, and I'm really open to anything, as long as it has some kind of soul or some kind of beat. I'm pretty forgiving of the craziness out there, and as long as it sings to me in some way, it's
Got it.
good.
All right, so uh, final question I ask all my guests. Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
Hmm. Um, my room was mostly neat. I'm an organized sort of guy. I keep what I need in places where I know that they belong. I think part of my organization has helped me be successful with my career. I built the world's largest library of cannabis publications because I can organize it, and I had the forethought to be able to share it. And AI, I think can be really overwhelming for people. They don't really know what to do with GPT. But organizing the ways that I want to use AI in a separate document that I hold on to has helped me manage AI effectively. So I think organization is something I've had since my early room days. But I think also I'm blessed to have folks around me who care about me and who have supported me. So my room was also filled with warmth and love, and that's not to be underestimated. I think of all medicines, we were talking about laughter. Love is another important one,
Oh, yeah,
and
for sure.
we have to love not only ourselves but the people around us. I think there's a lot of hatred and vitriol in the culture, and that has to die out. We can't have a culture where everybody's got a bone to pick with everybody else.
So no artwork or posters or anything on the walls, anything that stands out that's memorable to
Yeah,
you?
no, my family had photographs and drawings of the Boston area, just tasteful artwork, pictures of the family, um, some of my scribbles that passed as artwork as a kid.
And they had them in your room specifically, yeah?
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. And where can people engage with you? Where can people engage with your work? Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, no, I'm all over socials. In terms of it's my personal website is my name, Benjamin Caplan. For people that are interested in learning more, um, Caplan Cannabis, Caplan, and Cannabis, Cannabis. All of my websites are kind of linked together. Um, but these days, the way to reach me is probably through my newsletter. I'm now, reaching close to 4 million people with that newsletter. And I'm on it every day, and I'm answering questions as they come up. Um, I have some questions on Instagram and Substack here that have come up, and I'm going to go answer them. So anytime people have questions or want to learn more, they can reach out to me almost anywhere.
Amazing. And for my audience, I want to thank everybody for listening. And I appreciate all the wonderful comments and the people have had and likes and even the 4-star reviews, not the 5 stars. Keep them coming because there's always a way to get better. And on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell and like and all that stuff. And thanks for getting the book as well. Man, I really thank you. It's a fascinating conversation. I love what you're doing. I love that you're out there, and there's not a lot of people, at your stature, with respect to healthcare professionals that are flexing their muscle to get this plant recognized as medicine. Unlike Lori Ajax. There you go, flex.
Definitely.
Thanks so much,
No, I
man.
agree. And thanks for your contribution too. I think, we all have to find our niche in the market, and whether it's talking to a friend or, hitting the doctor with a book over their head.
Yeah.
We have to work together to fix this culture.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching and listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode, and hit that bell. Like, comment. I so appreciate that. And check me out on social under Len May or Len May DNA. Find out more on LinkedIn or lenmaycoaching.com. And remember, everything is personal.